Everyone has moments in life they can't just stop thinking about. They can be embarrassing things, like that one time you face planted in front of a group of teenagers, or something amazing like the first time you hosted your family for the holidays. And on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, hosted by me, Keke Palmer, and presented by BMW, we know to savor the good memories and let go of the bad. And one thing everyone remembers fondly is their first time behind the wheel of a BMW. So come join me and BMW this summer as we explore pop culture moments and topics you just can't stop thinking about on Baby, This is Keke Palmer, sponsored by BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is J.M. Brandt, one of the writers of the new comic series, Swamp Dogs. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. Finally, right?
Yeah, I know. But okay, so one of the things we like to do at the start is kind of figure out how you got introduced to horror. So what was the thing that brought you into the horror genre?
Sure. I don't want to spoil the story too much because it has to do with the movie that I brought with. But I guess my mom was my gateway drug to horror.
Okay.
She was a big horror fan. Her mom before her was also a horror fan, so it was sort of in the lineage. And just being negligent parents in the content that I consumed sort of led me to it.
That seems to be like a trend that like we either get the parents kind of introduced us to it, or everything was like locked down, and so we found it on our own type of storylines.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of It's almost like the person that's not allowed to drink before they turn 21, they go away to school and all of a sudden they become like a rager. Okay.
It was me.
Point to self.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah. That was me. My freshman year of college was woo.
Yeah, there's definitely like two paths to liferdom, and yeah, it's definitely, if it's verboten, I could see it being like an obsession, but no, I was indoctrinated very early.
So what was your first horror movie? Was it the one we're talking about today, or was it a different one?
No, I've been trying to figure out exactly what my first like beginning to end horror movie was, and I honestly couldn't tell you. I know the first one that I saw in the movie theater was Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, wow.
The Francis Ford Coppola movie.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so I was like 8 at the time for that one. But I had definitely seen horror movies before that also.
Wait, what a wild experience for an 8-year-old with Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's like the horniest. Yeah. That's like the horniest horror movie of all fucking time.
I know. I have some very weird kinks. Thank you, Gary Oldman.
Thank you, Gary Oldman.
I mean,
Same.
if we're on the spectrum, I'm pretty straight. I'm pretty far to the end of the spectrum, but I still have a soft spot / hard spot for Gary Oldman Dracula.
Look,
Hell yeah.
wait, which one, old or young?
That's a really good question.
It's important to have clarity here, or it could be both.
Yes.
It could
No,
be both.
okay.
No shame.
It could be both. Yeah. No. I'm a bit of an ageist, so I'm going young.
Okay.
You know, something about like those rounded sunglasses, the goatee, the long hair, the accent, like all of it. It's smoldering.
Too much. It's too much for my heart.
Okay,
I'm recording a podcast. I have to say.
I'm not sure that I've seen all of that movie.
Oh, I recommend it. I mean, it's
so good.
It's not what I think horror fans wanted to see, but it's kind of what we needed to see.
Oh my God.
It's so beautiful, and there's so much weirdness to the movie that you kind of forget over the years, like the transitions, and there's like all these like weird models. And
it's like it's
wild.
It's so campy and horny and incredible. Like it is just. I watched. So my fiance had never seen it. We watched it a couple months ago, and I hadn't watched it in a while. And I was like, "Oh my God, this movie really is so horny. This is so much." And I love it.
But that's also why my parents didn't let me watch it.
Of course,
It was so horny.
Yeah.
And this is blasphemy. This is not the Dracula I knew. This isn't Bela Lugosi. That was my dad.
Oh no.
So so I never ended up, I don't think I ever saw it.
Keanu Reeves is a terrible accent, but we can get off of Bram Stoker's Dracula. I just love that movie so much. It's so good.
So I am curious, because you are a writer. Were you interested in horror books, or did the literature side keep up with your horror movie side? Or I want to say with the reading, it really started out with like fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I
kind of didn't like I kind of didn't go in for books, period, until I was sort of let loose on my own in a library, and I discovered those like Dungeons and Dragons Choose Your Own Adventure books, and I was all about those.
Love those ones where you had to roll dice and stuff.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And but I mean, like, it started getting darker as time went on. I was also really into like mythology. So any book about Greek myths, Roman myths, Nordic myths, I was just all over that stuff.
So don't get a nerd out about D&D and fantasy books that often, but so you said that you were interested in like the D&D Choose Your Own Adventure books. Did you ever branch out into all the like TSR Dungeons and Dragons novels?
Yeah. Okay. So
nerds.
I'm yes, I know. No, I'm like a self-hating nerd. So I tread lightly. I got really into like pen and paper role playing around junior high.
I see that. I play Dungeon World.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right. I swore off it. I haven't role played in like 25 years or something. But
it's cool again. Just like,
I know.
Cool. I know. It's cool. Like, it's so funny that like it's cool now to play our thing.
I know. I have so many friends that are just trying to rope me in. They're like, check this one out. Like, this might be more your speed. And then I have a cousin who's famous for his sort of outsider weirdo art stuff, who got into it recently and started trying to get me into it. So we'll see. I have a feeling it's going to come back. But to answer your question, Terry, I was into the TSR books. I started with some Dragonlance books, and then
Dragonlance.
But then here's where horror comes back around. I got really into Ravenloft.
Ravenloft, yes.
And so I was all about role playing Ravenloft.
Me too.
I bought all the Ravenloft books.
Me too.
I had that fake tarot deck Ravenloft, and I would read people's fortunes in junior high using those, and and just from age 12 to 14, it was all the Ravenloft novels.
Hell yeah, I read all of those Ravenloft novels. I would voraciously dive into them and then go to the bookstore and get another one. I love those books so much. I haven't read them since I was a kid, but It was a good number of them.
I feel like maybe a dozen or so.
Probably.
Sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking it up right now.
Boy.
They might be garbage. I haven't. I still have one or two. I haven't reread them in a long time.
I'm pretty sure they were garbage, but they were entertaining for me. Like I was a huge into like all that shit. Dragonlance was my favorite. I still have like a soft spot for Dragonlance. And then, but I dipped into Forgotten Realms. Ravenloft was my whole thing once I realized that there was like a horror thing that was both fantasy and horror. Like, boom.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. I always felt like maybe you could tell somebody's personality based on which module they like to play or live in. And, so me, it was Ravenloft, and I was kind of like, not to shit on you or anything, but I was kind of very anti-Dragonlance, even though there were some really good stories that came out of it, but it just seemed too stereotypical, and even then I was very self-conscious about the way that I portrayed myself. So I was like, oh, I'm like the D&D hipster. I like Dark Sun. I like Ravenloft.
Oh, Dark Sun was great.
I'm interested in Spelljammer. You know.
Yeah.
What did I know?
Well, I will say that for me, the Dragonlance books started and stopped with Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss. Like those, the spring, winter, those ones, and the ones surrounding that initial group of people, I was all about. And then after that, I was like, I'm done. I don't want any of this other stuff.
The one that made a real impact on me was, I can't remember his name now, but it's like the most famous wizard in all of Dragonlance. Yes, and it was like the book of his life.
Yep.
That one really stuck with me, and I remember that being sort of my favorite out of all of them.
He was my favorite character. He was the one that I loved the most, and
he was a really deep character.
He was.
Or at least that novel made him very deep and gave him layers that I wasn't expecting out of something so dragons and armor and swords, just generic high fantasy tropes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely is. But it was like scratching that itch when I was a young kid for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
But I feel like we could talk about this, and Mary Beth's just like, yep, this is a thing.
I'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. You guys want to talk basketball? I can do that too.
Oh, I don't know anything about sports ball.
I watched.
Both of you shook your head at the same time.
I watched a basketball documentary yesterday, so that was fun.
There you go. Okay, what documentary?
Malice at the Palace. What was about Malice at the Palace?
God. Right. Okay. Yeah, that is bananas.
It was bananas.
Like, I haven't watched any of the documentaries, but I was there. Like, I watched it on TV. I watched it happen. It was pretty crazy.
Well, you really can't talk about anything. But we're getting off track. Yeah. We're getting off track.
Okay,
where were we?
So, when you were a kid, and did horror movies scare you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. I've become really jaded over time.
Okay.
It is really, really rare for something to scare me now, and I feel like part of the reason I consume as much horror as I do is sort of chasing that dragon. Right? That's like the holy grail, is like the movie that can scare J.M. But yes, movies would scare me. Horror movies would scare me. I was an easily scared child, even though I loved horror. So a lot of the fantasy movies I grew up with in the 80s would scare the shit out of me too. Labyrinth scared me. Dark Crystal scared me. Return to Oz scared me.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, like, because that shit freaked me out when I watched it for the first time in my late 20s.
Right. Oh, yeah. No.
Other than Labyrinth, we have discussed both of those on the podcast as things that have scared people growing up. So you're in good company. Yeah, we've even talked about like The Last Unicorn terrifying people.
Okay. Yeah, that's not one that I haven't seen that one yet at all. Like, I feel like everybody has. I know. Everybody has like I want to say 3 to 5 out of the 10 fantasy 80s movies like in their lineup, and then they just never branched out. I have never met anybody that grew up with all of them, and so I didn't have Legend, I didn't have The Last Unicorn, but I had Never-Ending Story and
that also fucked
Labyrinth
people up.
Yes. And to this day, I will say that Labyrinth is genuinely scary, and the thing that scares me the most is the happy ending.
It's been so long since that was like a staple for me. Like I used to watch that all the time as a kid, partly because as a closeted queer person, I was like, David Bowie is really beautiful.
Yeah. And the bulge. You can't forget the bulge.
Yes, exactly. I was like,
which, as we find out, watching Man Who Fell to Earth is all Bowie. That is all Bowie.
Hey.
Labyrinth, at the very end, spoiler alert for 35-year-old movie, she's in a mirror talking about how much she misses everybody, and all the puppets start coming one by one into the mirror, and then she goes like, well, how am I gonna find you? And she turns around and they're all in her room. I still find that horrifying.
That is kind of horrifying. There were a bunch
of weird freaky Muppets in my room that
I'd be like, get the fuck out. I didn't want to have anything to do with you in the first place. Get the fuck away from me.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so in answer to your question, yes, I did get scared by horror movies, very much.
Okay, and so then you also said that you're jaded now, which we can both relate to, and that it's sort of like the holy grail of finding the movie that would scare J.M. So what is the last movie that has done that to you?
The last movie that I had to turn on the lights for was The Orphanage.
Okay.
I was watching it alone in my apartment, probably like 2007 or so.
Yep.
And, I couldn't get through the whole movie in the dark alone.
I went to go see that in the movie theater with my brother, and eyeballed like a baby in that movie.
It's heartbreaking.
It's so heartbreaking.
It's genuinely a masterpiece. It's beautiful. It's terrifying. It's terribly sad.
Have you seen it, Mary Beth?
I haven't.
It's so good. Oh, it's so
good. It gets 5 J.M. stars. So
hell yeah,
it's worth checking out. But yeah, so that's the last one.
Okay. Oh, wow. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And considering I've seen 1,000+ horror movies, it's really tough to come by.
Okay.
So I also have a question, because this movie gets brought up an awful lot. So I'm curious, have you seen Terrified? Not Terrifier, but Terrified.
No, I haven't.
Oh,
you should go watch that one.
Watch that's on Shudder.
Okay.
It's on Shudder.
If you have Shudder, you should go. It's on.
I do have Shudder.
It's on there. Right. It's Argentinian, I think.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the few movies that, as an adult, has rocked me to my core. So, be curious to see if that one affected you at all.
Consider it done. That's my homework for this month, and I will let you know.
So, J.M., then what draws you to the horror genre now as an adult?
That's a really good question. I actually earlier today went to the movie theater for the third time since the pandemic started.
What'd you see?
And I saw X.
God damn it! Everyone's fucking seen X before me. I'm sorry. I'm very excited to see
it's
it.
Okay.
I'm very.
It was good. I'm actually a little bit worried about backlash for my book because of X, because there are certain things that happen in the movie that happen in issues that haven't come out yet. And so I don't want to be accused of aping Ty West. But
hopefully people would know really that comic books don't just come out that quickly. It wasn't like
yeah, we're not South Park or anything, right? Yeah, we're not just scanning the headlines for yeah, or we just feed a bunch of speed to our artist and get to work. It was really good though. So it got me thinking about what draws me to horror in the first place, and it is. I have this weird philosophy that people should expose themselves to whatever they feel capable of exposing themselves to. It goes back to smoking way too much weed as a teenager and having this mystical revelation that we're all sense reporters for some cosmic consciousness. I know, right?
Fuck yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah, so I have the stomach for it, and so it is something that I will expose myself to. For the greater benefit of everybody.
Hell yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a cool response.
Bet you weren't expecting that answer.
No.
I wasn't. And I'm glad you gave it to us. That's very different than anything we've heard before, and I love that. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's just, it's really fun. I took some classes on horror in college and read some philosophy of horror. And the idea is that the appeal of horror is that you're in a safe space and it allows you to envision this like the most gnarly, visceral version of the id that you could possibly have in a safe zone. And I subscribe to that, I want to see what it looks like for somebody to be chopped into a million pieces, but not actually have it happen because I have a heart. So
yeah, it's always funny. Like my coworkers will be surprised that I get queasy at the sight of real blood, and I don't like any of that kind of stuff. But I will gladly go see someone get chopped up.
Right.
I have the same problem. I can't watch war movies, and people are like, "What the fuck? You love horror movies?" I'm like, "It's so different, though. Like, it's so different.
Yeah.
It's just like because the war movies are more real to me in my head, and it's not the same. It sounds bizarre, but it's very different in my brain in terms of that kind of violence and gore.
Yeah,
I'm morbidly curious about true crime stuff. My wife is all about it, but she can't sit down to watch a horror movie for the life of her. She gets way too like grossed out by all of it. But these true life accounts of cult rapes and bizarre, ghastly murders and stuff, and she's into it, and I'm like, this is terrible. Like, why do you want to hear about these people that have been abused and mutilated? And that doesn't appeal to me.
One of my friends is the same exact way. She does not like horror movies at all. She refuses to go see them, but she has no problem listening to true crime podcasts, digging into serial killers. She is like an encyclopedia of serial killer knowledge, and I'm just like, you don't like horror.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. I did actually, sort of breaking my rule a little bit. I read, the comic book bio of Ed Gein, like last week. So shout out to that. It's really good.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Eric Powell, the artist and co-writer of it.
I didn't know that they had a comic book of Ed Gein's biography.
Yeah, it's God, what is it called? I think it's called Did You Hear About Eddie Gein, or Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Did? And it's written by Eric Powell, who's famous for a book called The Goon, and co-written by a true crime author who had written like the definitive.
Oh, Harold Schechter. Yeah.
Did you hear what Eddie Gein done?
Yes.
Yeah, because Harold Schechter wrote a book about like him. I think he wrote a book about him. Oh, this is cool. Right. I hadn't heard of this before.
Yeah. Eric Powell's probably, I mean, not to dunk on my artist or anything, but I think Eric Powell might be the best interior comic artist of all time.
Hell yeah.
You brought up comics. How did you get introduced to like writing? How did you get interested in doing either writing for comic books or just writing, period?
Right. That's a good question. Honestly, I don't know. It's something that I think I had wanted to do for a very long time. When I was in school and stuff, I was always encouraged by teachers about my imagination, about my ability to tell a story, about my ability to think up things that, I guess didn't occur or happen in real life. And so it was a mixture of that, like that kind of encouragement, you should be a writer, and also reading stuff that I didn't like and wanting to do better than that. And as far as comics in general, I found comics at a very early age and was super obsessed with them, and ducked in and out of being a comic book fan, and went through my not all comics have to be about superheroes renaissance at one point, and just discovered a whole lot of amazing stuff and fell back into it, and then also realized that superhero comics can be done right. Like they don't have to be commercials for action figures. Like you can tell amazing stories, even when dealing with spandex. So
I went through a very similar transformation where like I didn't like comic books because I didn't want to. I was like, I have to read everything to know everything that's going on with. It's like so daunting to get caught up with like Spider-Man and Superman, and then I kind of this is so cheesy, but when the Christopher Nolan Batman movies came out, I was like, I want to read these comics, and found out that there were one-off series that, like, if you just knew who Batman was, you could kind of read them and you didn't have to be well-versed. And that's so cool.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
such a cool,
100%.
There's so many cool comic books out there. And I also just, I love comic books that aren't superhero. And there's so much out there that, again, I didn't know about until I found my local comic book store. But there's some really cool stuff. Like,
yeah,
holy
there's
shit.
really cool stuff. Yeah, I'm constantly in awe.
Like, what are some of your favorites right now that you're reading or have read that, like, really impressed you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not reading a whole bunch of current stuff right now. Just because I'm reading stuff for inspiration.
Yeah.
I am sort of catching up on my Marvel right now. I'm going through, like the whole X-Men and associated X-Men stuff, using Marvel Unlimited. So I think I'm like 4 or 5 months behind.
Okay.
Then I just relatively recently got into Junji Ito. So I've been devouring his stuff. Yeah. And, I know. And I had friends for years telling me, "Oh, you need to read this Junji Ito stuff," and it just was on my to-do list, and I never got around to it. And now I'm mad at younger me for waiting that long. So that's really fantastic. And you know what? I feel like I'm gonna leave people out, but I've really been enjoying Barbaric. Is a comic book that I'm enjoying. I just read the first couple issues of Chicken Devil, and that's really good. It's kind of like a Breaking Bad type story.
Okay.
Is the best way of putting it. It's like a guy that owns a hot chicken restaurant, and it becomes this like crime thing where he goes on the lam. Yeah. Yeah, and he's like wearing the mascot outfit. It's cool. And I just relatively recently appeared on a podcast for Chris Conan. I think that's his name, and he's the writer of That Texas Blood. And so I read that, and that is really, really good.
Cool. Hell yeah. Oh, I love finding new comics. But
yeah, me too.
We're talking about comics. You have a comic.
Yes, I have a comic.
Tell us about your comic. What is your comic? What's it about?
Yeah, so this first book is called Swamp Dog's House of Crows. And so the Swamp Dogs are the titular characters, and they are voodoo-powered undead Confederate soldiers.
Hell yeah.
And so House of Crows is about a lesbian couple and a goofy stoner metal band versus these voodoo-powered undead Confederate soldiers. We have it play out. The goal between my co-writer and I was always to make this first 5-issue miniseries seem like an old-school grindhouse horror movie meets 80s horror, and have it play exactly like a movie. So
it does.
that the beats are exactly like a movie.
One of the things that like really jumped out at me when I was reading the comic is I love the art style, particularly of the monsters, and there's the moments of like the horror aspect of it reminds me a lot of some of the kind of covers I would see of EC Comics. There's something about the design. Like there's a moment in the first issue where a man comes across like the boneyard, and there's like a close up on his face, and he looks like he could have fit in one of those EC Comics. And I love that kind of art, because it brings me back some little bit of nostalgia, but in a way that feels modern.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Kuber Ball, our artist, who's also working on a Vampirella book, so he can do Pretty Women and Gore. And I found him because he had done an Army of Darkness post-apocalyptic book.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, I want this guy to be my artist. He's really good at doing all of that, and he's really good at designing characters, honestly, because his direction for that guy that you're talking about is Homeless Drifter. And Kuber's Brazilian, so his version of Homeless Drifter is a lot different than mine. And, you know, I wanted to give photo references for everybody because I'm a control freak that way, but I didn't for this one. And maybe I should have, but I'm really happy with what he came up with.
Yeah, there's a lot of character behind it.
Yeah, there really is. Like, you know, definitely, speaking of horror movies and stuff, I wanted to sort of pay homage to Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which is one of the first times that I was terrified as a kid. And so the whole homeless drifter with a dog and unwittingly like stumbling in, looking after his dog, was from Killer Clowns.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
What other movies did you kind of look to, and even comics, for inspiration as you were writing this and giving kind of guidance on the art style?
So, the book actually started out as a movie pitch. I had been put in touch with a guy who knew the producers for the Halloween franchise.
Okay.
And he was like a budding filmmaker at the time. And so he was being asked to pitch horror movies. And so he came to me. He's like, oh, J.M., you're the horror guy. So do a pitch. And I wanted to remake Tombs of the Blind Dead, the 1970s horror movie, but update the premise and update the setting to, at the time, Hurricane Katrina was just like a few years old. And so New Orleans was rebuilding. And so I thought doing that in like a hurricane ravaged New Orleans would be awesome. And so it was going to be like picture for picture, it like almost like Gus Van Sant's Psycho, right? Like almost like shot for shot a remake of Tombs of the Blind Dead. And so that's kind of how it started out, and so that would be the main inspiration.
Cool.
But lots of movies, Sugar Hill, Serpent and the Rainbow, you know, all the voodoo sort of horror movies that are out there. Evil Dead 2 has a lot to do with it. I referenced Sutter Kane in issue 2, so In the Mouth of Madness plays a little bit into my brand of horror. You know, kind of just like I like saying that I've put all my horror influences in a blender and spilled it onto the page. You know, it's got like the dreadful hillbilly warning sequence, and it's got mutilated animals like the 70s Italian movies, you know, just everything. But definitely Fulci is a big influence also.
I could see that. Yeah. That's awesome.
And so, okay, so this is House of Crows, but do you have more Swamp Dogs things coming up that you're working on?
That's the plan, okay. Yeah. So the idea is, at least right now, having 2 ongoing series that spin out of this. Like, basically, House of Crows is the horror movie that introduces people to the Swamp Dogs themselves. Spoiler, the bad guys win. Like, I can't picture a good story where it's like the good guys win in 5 issues against, you know, liches with voodoo powers. Right. So, things don't go very well for the entire world, with the Swamp Dogs. And so spinning out of that, is something called Pets Unleashed, which is sort of like near future. And then post-apocalyptic is, War Pigs. Tentatively.
Oh wow.
And so the whole goal is to write both of those at the same time and have them come out at the same time and be ongoing series. And then, you know, as people find out with Swamp Dogs 3, we have pretty elaborate backstories for all of the villains. And so going back and doing like a one shot or a mini series about any one of the characters is totally something we want to do.
Cool. Okay, J.M., we talked about your horror history and your creative projects, but what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Yes. Yeah, let's get to the meat, huh? I brought John Carpenter's 1982 masterpiece, The Thing.
Yes. So, we'll read a quick synopsis. A research team in Antarctica is haunted by a shape-shifting alien that assumes the appearance of its victims.
Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum.
Okay, so J.M., take us back. When did you see this movie? How did you see this movie? Why is it your Scarred for Life pick? Give us your horror story.
Okay, horror story. Yes, so my mother went into labor with me watching The Thing in the movie theater.
What?
Like in July of 1982. Yeah, she was in the theater and went into labor with me and got terrified that she was the thing. And
oh my God.
Yeah, and so the rest is history. And so that was always sort of a running joke in the family, is like, oh, J.M., he's the thing, right? You know, like... And so they would talk about it, but they didn't want to say too much because it's a fucking terrifying movie full of horrible shit that children should never be exposed to. And so they didn't want to say anything about it other than like, oh yeah, like The Thing, it was about aliens being inside of people. And so that's the joke. So it had these really ominous overtones for me growing up because, you know, it was sort of this taboo subject that they would always bring up over and over again and joke about over and over again. And so when I was finally old enough, I don't know if it was them that showed it to me or me that watched it on my own and finally felt like, okay, let's see what it is that they're talking about. But yeah, I finally watched it and it was so much more frightening than I thought any horror movie could be, and to this day is one of the top 3 most frightening horror movies I've ever seen, I think. And I grew up watching Big Trouble in Little China on repeat, but didn't really watch like all that much more of Kurt Russell or John Carpenter for that matter. Never really got into like The Escape from New York or LA or, you know, either of those. And so just seeing Kurt Russell and John Carpenter in this different light was just eye-opening for me too.
How old
Do you remember
were you?
how old you?
Oh, one brain cell, Terry.
I want to say I was probably 10 or 11 when I saw it. Yeah.
Were there specific things that you remember, like really, really terrifying? I mean, there's so many moments in this movie. That
yeah, there's so many things.
But was it like the special effects that got you, or?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's so much of everything, right? Like, you know, I have a real place in my heart for John Carpenter and his movies, but if I'm being honest about like directorial skill, it's almost like he had one of those, have you guys seen the comedy Old School?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so do you know the moment where they're trying to get their fraternity, legalized, and Will Ferrell goes up for the speech and debate and just kind of blacks out and has a fugue state and just does the best oration speech of all time? I kind of feel like that is John Carpenter's fugue moment because like as much as I enjoy his movies, this is on a whole other level of directing and editing and everything that he just never hit ever again. So everything about this movie is scary. The music is scary. The cinematography is scary. The pacing is scary. The setting is scary. The special effects are beyond scary. But I think as a kid, for me, what it was there were all these horror movies that I had seen, and based on budget or based on imagination limits or wanting to stay under a certain rating, they never went all the way there, in air quotes. The Thing went there, and it went beyond. And so every time you thought that they were going to pull away or pull some punches or cut to a shadow of something, they didn't. And the special effects rose to the occasion of allowing them to go there. And I think that's what really did it for me. Was just like the most twisted, fucked up shit that you could think of about aliens, exist. And, you know, just refreshing myself for this podcast, I was watching it and I still got gotten by the autopsy, or sorry, not the autopsy, but the paddles moment. Like the pacing of that paddles moment is phenomenal. Like it will never not be scary.
That's so funny because in the notes I wanted to talk. I said that this is a perfect movie and how I've seen this movie. So this is one of my all-time favorite movies. Of like, I have the poster, I have a shirt, I have a tattoo of the thing. Like this movie is like everything.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That's awesome.
But that scene will always get me, no matter how many times I've seen it. It is a perfect scare moment. It's just incredible.
It really is.
It's wild. And just like, because they go all in with like how the stomach rips open and you see the teeth, and it's just
it bites off his arms and he lifts his arms up and it stubs and
right.
So
and
good.
That moment is perfect. And so is the moment that always gets me, honestly, is the petri dishes of blood that like explode.
Yes.
I've seen this movie not as many times as probably either of you, and we'll get to that in a moment. Every time I watch this movie, I'm always surprised at who it ends up being for some reason. Like whichever blood one, I'm always on edge. And I'm like, I've seen this movie. I know how it's going to end. And every single time I'm like, oh my God, is it going to be this moment? And it always surprises me.
It's like, which one is it again? Is it Knowles? It's Knowles, right? It's Knowles. No, it's not Knowles.
Yep.
Yeah. Every time.
Every time, yeah. No, I agree. And there's so much that I forget between viewings of this movie. And I do watch it fairly regularly. And it's just this constant wellspring of inspiration and surprise for me.
Yeah.
It's a perfect movie. It's a perfect horror movie.
Perfect horror movie. I've seen it so many times. I've seen it multiple times in theaters. Like, I first saw this movie when I was 19. Was I 19?
Okay.
I have a very, very vivid memory of the first time I watched this, because I was visiting my parents. They had just moved to California, like where you're from the East Coast. They just moved across the country. It was spring break. My sophomore year of college. My now fiance was coming up to meet my parents for the first time, and he came with me up to California. And one of the nights, like during that visit, we watched The Thing with my stepdad. And like him and my stepdad were like, "Oh, The Thing is so good," and I watched it with them, and I was so fucking freaked out afterward because I was just like sweating, and everything about it freaked me out. Just like the end, I just felt so tense, and the worst part was that we had a dog. Her name was Fern. She was a big hound dog. She followed me to bed and sat on my bed and just stared me in the eye for like,
oh no.
And I texted a picture because it was like early days of dating. So Steve had to stay downstairs on the couch while I slept upstairs. And I sent him a picture and I was like, why is she staring at me like this? She had never done that before. And she was just sitting there and staring at me. And I was like, holy shit. Holy shit.
She watched the movie with you and just wanted to fuck with you.
I swear to God.
But what I'm hearing, Mary Beth, is that you could actually be the Thing. And this is a long con. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. That's true. Never know.
It like that. And then so since then, that movie has been like, my fiance and I will just put it on. Like, hey, do you want to watch a movie? Let's just put on The Thing. Christmas time, always want to watch The Thing. Every time it snows, let's watch The Thing. We've seen it on the big screen a couple times. It's just like a perfect movie.
Sounds like a comfort watch for you.
It is a comfort watch, and it's like, I know what's going to happen, but I don't. Like you said, this very like a similar thing, J.M. Like I know what's going to happen, but it's a movie that I have a hard time putting on in the background because I always want to pay attention to it. Because like I want to know what's going to happen. I want to see those moments. I want to like watch that opening scene with the dog and like that incredible helicopter shot of the dog just running across the snow with the Ennio Morricone soundtrack just going boom, boom. Like just it seems so simple, but it is so complicated. And I know that sounds so cheesy, but it is like a very simple looking thing, but it's so effective in establishing how isolated everybody is.
Well, it grabs you from the very beginning though too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're like, what is going on? Why are they chasing after this dog? Why are they trying to firebomb and blow up this fucking dog? Like just like you have so many questions immediately.
And like you don't waste time trying to like get to know the guys before the dog shows up. It's like immediately about the dog. It's like, we'll get to know these guys as it goes along. And that's like every character is a really good character despite not having a ton of content. Like we just jump right in. We're not trying to like establish who these characters are before the alien. It's like, we'll just use the alien as character development for a really interesting movie about masculinity too. Like in a way that I think about more often now, but how it's like this really interesting look at male spaces and power dynamics between men and then how they change in the face of danger. And it's just fascinating to like look at this movie now and think about, I don't know if Carpenter knew what he was doing with those dynamics, but it's fascinating to watch it now and see these relationships between men and like this kind of toxic masculinity thing going on about who's in charge and who's not and who's being like questioned into, it's so cool.
Yeah, I genuinely believe that like he had an idea of going deep with it, and that the most capable leader isn't always the best leader, and that sort of dynamic. And really, Wilford Brimley was probably the most right, but went about it in the most shitty way. And and McCready, for all his good leadership skills, also just like messed up a lot. Like there were a lot of moments where he was just doing the wrong thing or the right thing in the wrong way.
I want to circle back on that a little bit later too, because I have thoughts.
Okay.
I definitely want to put a pin in that.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, no, you're right. Masculinity is a big thing with it too. And the isolation and just different philosophies of life and how to live. And one of the things, like you're talking about the intro grabbing you, I always forget that it starts with an actual footage of a spaceship flying through space. I just totally
me too.
That always exits my mind when I watch it.
I always think it opens up with the dogs.
Yeah, I feel like it opens up with the dogs, and then nope. One of the things about like the character development, you mentioned this, and I want to get this point across, is I realized that it's a stealth roll call movie. I'm really into roll call movies where, you just have a roster of characters and it's like, this is who they are and this is why they're cool and this is, what's up. It might be the best stealth roll call movie of all time.
I could see that. Yeah. Because I'm thinking about how like the characters are all introduced and they have like a thing. It is definitely feels like yeah. Well, so what I think like is pulling a lot of people back to this movie is that I think there are different ways you can read this film. And I think that there's a lot of different like themes behind it that you could explore. Because obviously, Mary Beth, you're talking about the idea of the masculinity aspect of it. You could look at it as the kind of Cold War fears. I mean, at one point, McCready is literally holding up a flare saying, "You kill me, I'm blowing everyone up." Like that mutually assured destruction that was like a fear of the nuclear holocaust was going to happen from the Cold War.
Right.
Like you could see that and how it kind of fosters that paranoia and fear, particularly of nationalism and the fear of the other, because you don't know, could one of these people be bad? Could it be a Russian operative sneaking in? Like that is that was the fear that was big at that time. And it was also inherent in the story because when the original short story was being written, it was sort of about like the fears of like the Red Scare and that kind of McCarthyism and that aspect of it. So I think there's like that aspect of it that you could explore. But I also think when I was watching it for the podcast, I was really cluing in on the fact that this also kind of an AIDS metaphor here in terms of like the you could be infected and no one would know and you could pass it on to someone. There's the idea of like you have a group of completely comprised of men, and the idea that because like AIDS, particularly when this movie was coming out, it was like the gay cancer is what it was being referred to. Right. And there's also the fear that could it be transmitted to me as a straight person, that aspect of it. There's the idea of testing the blood, which impure blood is a theme that gets addressed a lot in movies that have a sort of a queer AIDS subtext, particularly the 80s. You would see that in like things like the one that really jumps out to me is Near Dark, the vampire movie, because that's all about like blood and being impure blood, and the vampirism as being like a metaphor for AIDS and in a way. So like I'm seeing that now, and I'm like seeing all this sort of like fear of like either like the homosexuality or also of like AIDS kind of manifesting in this small group, which was coming out at the perfect time for that to be a fear that a lot of people seem to have, unfortunately.
Yeah.
100%. So I know that I'm wearing headphones, but can you see my ears bleeding? Because you just blew my mind. I've never once thought about it as an AIDS corollary, and you're totally right. It's I'm stunned. I'm stunned and speechless.
I don't know. Recently, I've been like looking back at like a lot of films from like the 80s and 90s that touch on that. Like I'm a very, very big, I could go on a whole dissertation about how Alien 3 is about AIDS. Like I could like dig so deep into the movies that are about like either the fear of like homosexuality or the fear of like the AIDS pandemic happening at that time, because whether people know it or whether it was like subtext that, or they didn't even know that they were doing it. There's a lot of that, I think, that's bleeding into films, particularly in the 80s and sometimes into the early 90s. But that's a whole other story that I could go down a rabbit hole on. But there's also like cosmic horror. Like this movie is all about that kind of cosmic sense of horror. It's this unknowable thing that you look at it and it does not resemble anything that you could ever experience. Because when I first saw this movie, now it's bringing me back to when I first saw it, I was probably in college when I saw it. And I don't have any like real firm memories of it, but I do remember that I was in college because I wasn't a huge fan of Carpenter films. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, when I was a kid, I had remember seeing Halloween, which as a young kid, I thought was boring. I have a far more appreciation for it now, but as a kid, I was bored by it. I hated his Christine when I was a kid because it was completely different than the book from what I remember as being a kid. Like, and that is a thing that young Terry was so upset if any movie was like, that was adapting like Stephen King books was not accurate to the book. I was so angry at it. So I saw those. I did like Big Trouble in Little China as a kid, but that was because of the magic and the fantasy aspect of it. But for the most part, I was not a Carpenter fan. And it wasn't until college when I got like a shitty VHS tape from like Blockbuster or something, the kind that had been played so many times that it's like staticky and, you know, looks really shitty. And I think that actually kind of enhanced my watching of it because as good as the effects look, and I think they hold up today, I was watching in 4K, you know, because like that's what we live in. Like, but at that time, it gave it sort of like that sort of dangerous quality because it kind of, I think, even more hid some of the maybe imperfections and the seams that might show. And gave it that sort of dangerous quality that I also had with a couple other movies that I'm hoping that I'll be able to talk to with someone on the podcast eventually. But this movie, that is what I remember of it. I remember watching on a shitty VHS and being like, this is not how aliens are. And that's what like really, this movie and Alien for that matter, like shocked me when I first saw it because it's not what we typically see as like an alien. And I think that kind of bleeds into the cosmic horror aspect of it where it's like, this is unknowable. This is something that if you saw this thing, if you saw a dog split in half and this thing's birthing out of it, or you saw like spiders come out of a man's head, like a spider legs, and it starts to like walk with antennas, I think you'd go insane. Like there's no way that you would be able to like rationally contextualize what you were seeing. And I think this movie takes the sort of like cosmic horror, H.P. Lovecraft, that kind of aspect of it, and really sells it in a way that you don't see a lot in movies.
Oh, I agree. I mean, as far as Lovecraftian cosmic horror goes, it might be the best representation of what actually makes it scary. You know, like the pacing of a Lovecraft story or the context of a Lovecraft story dwells on this sort of like unknowable, unimaginable horror that will make you go insane, right? But in a visual medium, you have to depict it. And he depicts it, and he depicts it really well. He's not going with non-Euclidean. How did Lovecraft describe it?
Yeah, like non-Euclidean geometry.
Yeah, right. You know, all these codes that writers can do, right? When I write my own prose and it's not accompanied by comic panels, it's the same way. You use a lot of this like ineffable language to describe something that can't be described, and they did a phenomenal job of it. And it begs the question: what do these aliens look like in their natural form? Right? Like, is there a natural form? Like, are they just walking around as imitations of other stuff that they've, you know, all the defense mechanisms that they have, the tendrils, the legs, were they co-opted from other beings that they infected in centuries past?
That's what has like really recently fucked me up with this movie is like, well, they were on a spaceship, so they had to have some kind of form or consciousness. So are they an alien that is just a consciousness, or like a bacterial microbial thing that has a wider consciousness? I don't know. And it always messes with my head because you don't know, and you kind of have to think about it. But it's like, what do they look like? Is there a form, or is it something much more like weird and not unknowable and hard to understand in our own understanding of the universe and what it means to be like alive and a being?
Right. Yeah. Well, let me do one more for you, Mary Beth. Who says it was their ship?
What? Now my ears are bleeding. Like, true.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, if they're taking over people and life forms, what if they didn't have the technology, but they infected a civilization that did have the technology, rode one of those puppies down, and decided to start plaguing some other planet? There might be nothing technological or intelligent about this species whatsoever, and it's just all predatory instinct to replicate.
Wow.
What the fuck?
Wow.
Ascribing an intelligence to something evil like that scares me a little bit more than the mindlessness, but for a lot of people, this, like, just the animal instinct is the scary thing, right? Like, that you can't reason with it because it doesn't have any intention. It's just all pure animal will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Wow.
Sorry.
I was like, where do I go from there?
Well, I do think that...
To bed.
I do think that we need to... Exactly, yeah, where the dog is staring at you. I do think that, with the effects and stuff, we do need to give a shout out to Rob Bottin.
Oh my god, yeah.
Who I believe, if I did the math correctly, was 22 when he did this movie.
Oh, shit.
Oh, this movie.
So you're telling me my life is a sham?
Yes.
Because, like, I don't think at 82 I'm going to be able to do anything as great as that.
I know, 22. And, I mean, by 22, he had worked on King Kong. He worked on Star Wars. He worked on Piranha, The Fog, Airplane, The Howling. And then The Thing at 22.
It's insane.
He's doing The Thing. I'm like, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah.
And the effects are so good. And like I said, I do think, if you're looking at it critically now, you can see some of the, maybe some seams behind it. But I think these hold up better considering this was from 40 years ago? 40 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I turned 40 this year, so yes.
Yeah, and I turned 41 this year. So yeah, 40 years ago, if you look at it with 40 years distance, it's held up much better than some of the CGI that came out in the early 2000s. Yeah. I'm immediately thinking of the Scorpion King, the horrible CG there. The practical effects 40 years later, I think are still holding up because it is real. It is there. It has presence in a way that a lot of I'm very anti CG. I think that it's good to add to things. But I think if you are making something that is completely CG, which brings me to The Thing remake, which originally was going to be visual effects, practical effects, and the studio got freaked out and painted over them with CG.
Really?
It's so fucking ridiculous. Okay. It's so very
I didn't know that.
Yes, there's scenes out on YouTube of the practical effects work that they had filmed with. The studio's no, and it's really good. And it's so frustrating that got painted over because they're oh, this doesn't look good. We need to just completely bleed it over with CG. And that annoys the shit out of me. But that's why I think these effects live up so well because they have presence.
Right.
I agree.
Okay, so I've been really scared to go and watch the remake, or it's a prequel?
It's a prequel.
It's a prequel, right. Okay. Is it good? I mean, despite the fact that it uses CG, is it?
I haven't seen it since the movie theater. I remember being pleasantly surprised at how decent it was. But I really hated the CG effects. And then when I found out years later that they had done it with practical effects, I really would like to have seen that movie without any of the CG or just CG enhancements. But I remember it literally bleeds into this movie. If I remember correctly, the last shot of that movie is them chasing the dog across the...
Yeah.
Well, it's about the Norwegian team, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which I think is brilliant. If I were making a movie sequel, prequel to The Thing, that's where I would go with it too.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it hits a lot of like same beats though, unfortunately. So like bringing comparisons to the original you're going to do it because there are some things that are almost like we should redo this kind of feel to it, right? So there's like that aspect of it that I don't think you're going to compare it to the original, and you're going to find the original superior. You know what I mean in that regard. But did you see it, Mary Beth?
I didn't. I know a lot about it, but I haven't seen it because
Well, I think that just goes like to show how perfect a movie The Thing is in the first place, right? Because, I mean, he really hit home what it would be like for a team of isolated, intelligent people to confront this unknowable horror from beyond the stars. And so, like, it doesn't matter if it's an American team or a Norwegian team, like, it's gonna be the same sort of dynamic unless they're all idiots. Then you could have different beats. If they were all dumb, then, you know, like, it could have different beats. But otherwise, it's gonna play out more or less the same way. Like, maybe one person doesn't go off the deep end and trash everything, you know, to make contact with the outside world, but, you know, otherwise, yeah, like, that's how I would react, probably. That's how any one of the three of us would react. Except Mary Beth, because she's already The Thing.
Right, yeah.
Something I did want to talk about is that, you know, we're talking about how much we love this movie and how incredible it is, but its reception when it was released was fucking terrible. And I actually didn't know this, I think, until today when I was doing some research, that this came out and got terrible reviews. Like,
really?
It was apparently deemed the most hated movie of all time by a film magazine called Cinema Fantastique. And, like, people were saying it was just trash, it was too it was gory, it was, I think, what is it, the thing from Another World director, Christian Nyby, said it was, if you want blood, go to the slaughterhouse. All in all, it's a terrific commercial for J&B Scotch. It was called the quintessential moron movie of the 80s.
Wretched excess.
It's terrible. And so, two reasons for this that people cite are, one, it was in competition with E.T., I believe, which was a much different alien movie. And that one had much more hope and was much more family-friendly, while this one was too nihilistic, especially for the time period. The nihilism, particularly compared to E.T., people really didn't like it and thought it was just trash. And it's, you know, it's been reappraised, obviously, but John Carpenter said in 2008, I take every failure hard. The one I took the hardest was The Thing. My career would have been different if it had been a big hit, but the movie was hated, even by sci-fi fans. They thought I had betrayed some kind of trust, and the piling on was insane. Even the original movie's director, Christian Nyby, was dissing me. Like, this poor guy went through hell in 1982, and now we're all like, I've let, like, everything of The Thing all over me and, like, obsessed with it. But people back then were like, it's fucking terrible movie, which is insane to me.
Yeah.
It's unthinkable. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please go.
Okay. I was going to say, it's almost like the nihilism is a holdover from the 70s films, like the Scorsese stuff, and, even, I guess that's the 80s Deer Hunter and everything. Like, it has that sort of modern American golden age of film sort of vibe to it. And you're right, like, E.T. was in the theaters at the same time, and everybody wanted to pretend that not everything had to be Taxi Driver.
Right.
But, yeah, so I guess that makes sense. Honestly, I want to see a crossover between the two of them. I want to see, like, an E.T. meets The Thing.
Oh my god. E.T. is The Thing, but he is the benevolent version of it. Crossover event that we need.
Yeah, well, he does the finger thing with Elliot, and then, like, tendrils come out of his finger, and
he eats Elliot.
The kid.
Elliot.
I'm here for it. I'm here for that.
Sorry, I totally interrupted you.
No, one of the things that really surprised me when one of the reviews was actually in Starlog, which is a science fiction magazine, and said, quote, John Carpenter's The Thing smells, and smells pretty bad. It has no pace, sloppy continuity, zero humor, bland characters, on top of being totally devoid of warmth or humanity. It's my contention that John Carpenter was never meant to direct a science fiction horror movie. Here's some things he'd be better suited to direct. Traffic accidents, train wrecks, and public floggings. In Starlog, that is the review.
are they watching the same movie?
That's what I have to ask.
Like, the pacing is bad for a horror movie?
This movie is perfectly paced. It does not waste a single second.
No.
And it's a 2-hour
really
movie, but it doesn't waste a single second.
Right. Somehow it manages to encapsulate, like, the claustrophobia of being in a station together, but also the wilderness and the expanse of the Antarctic region at the same time. Yeah, what are these people smoking? And how can I avoid it?
Seriously.
But, like, in talking about this kind of, the way the thing was received, like, what the hell movie is going to have this kind of reception, like, that we've seen that we're like, this is terrible, and it's going to, like, I'm so curious what, like, the cinema landscape and, like, the classics are going to be in, like, 30 years when we're older.
Okay.
Like, isn't that wild to think about?
Can I post a contender?
Yes.
My number one contender for the movie that was panned the most, that I think will be beloved and viewed as a film classic from here till eternity, is Flying Lotus. The musician directed a movie called Kuso that prompted walkouts at Cannes, or at one of the film festivals, like one of the main film festivals. It was screening there. It's a Shudder exclusive.
Yes.
Like, Shudder obtained it exclusively. It is so good. It's really, really smart. It's, I don't agree with every single decision, but I wrote a movie review of it, and I really think that eventually it'll wind up in sort of Library of Congress type territory.
Huh. I've actually never seen it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you should. You should get ready to be grossed out, because it grosses out me.
That's what I've heard. I've heard it's gnarly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the time he was, like, very much in the Adult Swim crowd.
Yeah.
And the Tim and Eric type crowd. And so there's a lot of that, meets David Lynch, meets, it's Cronenberg, Lynch, and Adult Swim all in one cringy, really interesting horror movie.
Huh. Well, I mean, you're saying that it grosses out people, but that's pretty much like the reception to this movie. I do think this movie came out at the wrong time. Like, I feel like if this movie came out maybe 5 years later, it would have been like a critical smash, because I think once we got into the 80s, and we had, like, a lot of the visual effects, there's a lot of really goopy shit that was happening in the 80s that I think this movie, like, just was it released too soon, I guess.
Well, I mean, something had to start it, right? Yeah. I mean, this could arguably be the thing that brought over sort of that Italian splatter sentiment to American horror.
Yeah.
Carpenter's a student of the game, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did want to go back to your point about maybe McCready was the worst person to be in charge.
To be fair, I didn't say that.
No, I know, but I want to go back to that. Terry is, because here's my question: at the end, were any of them the Thing? What are your thoughts?
Oh boy!
Oh my god!
Because I have a thought, and
I'm very excited to hear your
yours.
thought, because you've been teasing this conversation.
I've been wanting to talk about this ever since we were originally going to record. So, but I got to know: do either of you think either of those two were the Thing by the end?
Well, it makes me want to go back to, like, my philosophy education and Pascal's wager, Pascal's wager, I think it was called, where you make that, like, box to prove that God exists, and you do the pros and cons. I like not knowing. I like the Schrodinger's cat approach, where they, like, the only thing that I can definitively say is they're not both the Thing. Right? Yeah. That's the only thing that we know, because otherwise they'd be talking to each other in, like, T-Rex howls.
Can you imagine an ending to the movie where they're just like...
Honestly, though, I would be like, that's the perfect way to end this fucking movie. Like, that's incredible. No notes.
That's how the remake ends. No, I'm kidding. I wish.
Yeah, no, I mean, I want to say that John Carpenter doesn't even think one way or the other about it, and that he wanted to keep everybody hanging. And I'm perfectly content to be hanging
What about you, Mary Beth?
So I don't think either of them are the thing.
Okay.
I've thought about this a lot, and I've waffled back and forth. Like I always like, oh, it's definitely Childs. And then I interviewed Keith David, and he said he wasn't, which I know means nothing, but like hearing that from him, I was like,
right.
Well, I'm gonna have to take this into account because he played the character. But I don't think either of them are. I think it's just like a fucked up thing where they both just kind of freeze or get burned to death out there. Terry, but now I need to hear what you think. I'm very excited.
Well, here's the thing. It ultimately doesn't really matter, like you both are kind of saying, because the idea is regardless of whether any of them are, the thing has already won. They don't they distrust each other, and they're basically going to sit there until they freeze to death. Like it's a nihilistic ending. Fear has won, paranoia has won, the Cold War is over, and we both lost. Like that is kind of the way this movie ends. And so it doesn't really matter who the thing is, but MacReady is the thing. And this is why.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
It doesn't matter, but
this is why. So I thought about this the last time I was watching this because, all right, there's the kind of iconic scene where he is sitting there and he's talking to his like tape recorder, right? And he says, nobody trusts anybody now, or we're all very tired. That speech, right? Yeah. Well, before he talks about that, he's like, I'm going to make this recording and I'm going to bury it and no one will find it because he thinks that he can trust himself. Well, at that moment, I don't know if this is like a goof or if this is intentional, but the door behind him starts to close as if there's something hiding behind the door.
Oh, interesting. I've never caught that before.
Is that before or after he tests his blood, though?
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So that happens, and then they find his jacket, right? And there's the original thing where it's like, it must burst out of his clothes. Then they find the jacket of MacReady. All right, so you could think that like someone is trying to make people believe that it's MacReady and throw the scent off. However, when MacReady stands there and he's ready to blow up everything, it is mutually assured destruction as a way of like trying to make people believe that he is actually a good person, that he is not the thing. Because if he thinks that if he is the thing, he's not going to want to kill himself, and he thinks that's going to stop it. It doesn't, but what it does is the guy having a heart attack who ends up being the thing, because the thing is doing that kind of, as long as one of us can get out, we're going to be okay. And so the person does the heart attack, he gets the thing chopped into him. All of a sudden, people are like a little bit less suspicious of MacReady, and then he does the blood test. And throughout this, before that, people are saying, we don't even know if this blood test is going to work, and we have no reason to believe that this blood test is going to work. So what does it do? One of the blood explodes. Why does one of the blood explode? Because if that person is the thing,
herring.
Then it's a red herring, and no one's going to believe the MacReady because his thing is singed, everyone else's is singed, and they could, who knows how many of them could be the thing, because I don't think the blood test meant anything. And it was another way of throwing off the people from focusing on MacReady.
Right.
Wait, but then why did it explode? Then why did the blood explode?
Because the thing is sentient. I think the thing is sentient, and it knows.
Okay.
Oh, it knows when to explode. Oh.
I'm going to do this so that people know that MacReady can't possibly be the thing because it didn't do anything to him.
Interesting.
It's like a spanakopita or a baklava of a movie, isn't it? Just layers upon layers.
And there's two other things I want to bring up.
Oh my God.
There's two moments. One, I've thought about this a whole lot since we originally were going to record. One is that, is it Fuchs? Fuchs? Is that his name?
Fuchs.
Yeah,
He mentions that everyone should prepare their own meals because a sliver of this thing could infect someone. So he's saying that we need to eat out of cans. We need to not eat together. So there's that point. And then the second point is MacReady says that this thing wants to just be frozen again, wait out until rescue, and continue its assimilation of Earth. Those two things figure into the finale because what happens? MacReady is drinking his scotch and he hands it over to Childs. And after Childs drinks it, which again, a sliver of this thing could infect someone, and MacReady was just drinking from it, hands it over to Childs, and then laughs when Childs takes a drink. There's that. And what does he do? What does he say? He's like, I guess we should just wait out and see what's going to happen. Why does he want to do that? Because he's going to freeze himself and be rescued because he is the thing.
Okay. And see here, I view it as a happy ending. Because I believe that it's not ideal conditions for the thing freezing itself, and I don't actually think the thing wants to freeze itself again and just wait until rescue. I think the thing loses because it's cut off from the rest of the world and is going to die out. And it dies with Childs and McCready, regardless of whether one of them is it or not.
But it did survive in the snow until they dug it up, and then the Norwegians dug it up, and then it affected them.
Right, but inside the spaceship, right?
No, it crawled out. They find because they find the spaceship, and then like a few hundred feet away from it, they find that block of ice that they have taken out, and that's the thing that they had taken back to the camp.
Okay, I sit corrected.
Like I said, I've thought so much about this since we were going to talk about it, like I don't know, months ago.
Yeah.
So there's my conspiracy theory deep dive that Terry went a little crazy doing.
Hell yeah.
You have that like a Charlie Day chart behind you.
It's definitely like a look at this chart, guys. The conspiracy goes all the way to the top. Like that is totally
Yeah.
So there you go.
Okay. I like it. I like it. I like just theorizing about it.
Yeah, me too.
And I just really hope that nobody involved with it that actually had a hand in the decision making process has a resolved answer.
Yeah.
Either that or I kind of hope that there was like a Who Shot Mr. Burns type scenario where they filmed multiple different possibilities and kept it a surprise.
And it wasn't Maggie at the very end.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Or like Clue, where there's like so many different endings that they had filmed. It could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this.
Right.
Yeah. No,
I would pay so much money to watch like alternate versions of the ending of this.
Oh, me too. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. Like it's fun to talk about. It's fun to like think who it could be and like try to pinpoint things. But ultimately, it's material.
Right. But I'm glad that the space in between us planning to originally record and us actually recording afforded you all this like conspiracy nut time.
It's very exciting. I didn't know any of this, so this is very fun to know that this has just been sitting in Terry's head for months. Weeks,
it's just
whatever.
Been stewing, just sprung it on you.
It has. My board is like even more. It's like even more red lines drawing it. Yeah, it's just increased over the last few months.
Well, do we want to wrap this up and give the thing our rating out of 5?
Sounds good to me.
All right, Terry. Well, speaking of exploding petri dishes, Terry, how many exploding petri dishes out of 5 do you give the thing?
I give it 1.
Because there was only one?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I was waiting for Mary Beth's reaction.
Imagine. That would be so fun. I'm always hoping that one day it'll be real. Like, you'll be typing it up and then you'll be like, I actually hated it.
No, I think we've all said this. I'm pretty sure I know what everyone's rating is in this, to be perfectly honest. It's 5. This movie, I think, is perfect. It captures the feeling of isolation, of paranoia, of the idea that you really can't trust the people you're around in some cases. Like there's that fear that I think it taps into, that primal fear that we all have, that maybe this person that we're living with doesn't have my best interest at heart. Like there's that kind of primal aspect that I think it really taps into. There's so many different themes that I think this movie you could analyze this film through, and I think that makes it really special. The special effects are fantastic. It's 5. Like there's no beating around the bush for that. Give me 5 exploding petri dishes that are not real, like that are just proving that McCready is not the thing. Anyway, Mary Beth, what about you? How many exploding petri dishes?
Obviously, gonna give it a 5. This is my all-time favorite movie. I can watch it anytime, all the time. I've seen it so many times. It's incredible. I have a tattoo of it. It's just everything to me. I love this movie so much. We've said it all, but this movie is just a masterpiece. It will scare me no matter what. It is so beautifully done. And also didn't mention this, but my friend did a hilarious Kurt Russell costume for this movie in the middle of the summer, and he wore he had a Jane Bisiach in a full snowsuit, and as the night went forward, he stripped off pieces because he was sweating his ass off in my house. It didn't have air conditioning. So nice. This movie is just like a part of every, Steve and I say, somebody got to the blood all the time. All-time favorite line of any movie when they find the blood is gone. It's just like, this movie is just like a part of my brain, and it is incredible.
Nice. Did your friend have the hat?
He did have the fucking hat. He had the fucking hat.
Oh, nice.
It was and that was like he was like, I can't do this costume without the hat. He made a flamethrower out of cardboard that he had on his back. Like, it was incredible. He had the hat.
That's amazing.
The best part. Oh God, we didn't even fucking talk about the hat. That's it. That's hat. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me.
It's a pretty good
anyway.
hat.
J.M., you have the final word. How many exploding petri dishes out of 5 do you give the thing?
You know what? It's, I mean, it's like you said, it might be the best horror movie ever made. And so, it's 5. It's infinity petri dishes.
Just forever. Lovecraftian amount of petri dishes. Just.
Yeah, it's a non-Euclidean amount of petri dishes.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us, J.M., to talk about this movie and allowing me to go off on my crazy tangents. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have that you'd like to share?
Okay, so what I would like to share is issue 2, as of the recording of this podcast, is out in stores. Swamp Dog's House of Crows from Black Caravan and Scout Comics. Issue 3 will be released tentatively April 27th.
Nice.
So as of right now, I think you can still kind of pre-order it with your local comic shop. If you're having a hard time hunting it down, you can go to swampdogscomic.com or scoutcomics.com, and we have physical copies and digital copies. You can find me at MRJMBRANDT on Twitter. That's Mr. J.M. Brandt, or at j.m.brandt on Instagram, or at Swamp Dogs Comic on Instagram.
Sweet. And now's the perfect time to get caught up, just in time for issue 3 to come out. And we will have listeners will have all of this information in our show notes, so you can go take a look at the comics out on the websites and all that kind of fun stuff.
Perfect. Sounds good.
So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with The Thing? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time. Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.